Hello and welcome to another episode of the Fractional Impact podcast. Today we're speaking to Anja Dunphy about why many companies stall out when moving into the mid-market, how to spot the hidden choke points draining profitability and morale, and how to scale sustainably while keeping culture and performance aligned. Anja, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Good morning. Thanks, Stuart. I'm Anja Dunphy with Ascend Consulting. We do fractional COO work. We focus on is working with companies who have discovered they're in an underperformance stage. So historically, they've done well, or they know there's an area where they feel like they should be doing well, and they just can't figure out what the problem is. So we step in to diagnose the problem and help pull that cavity and solve it for them.
Awesome. And Finn Patrick joins us as well. Finn, if you would like to introduce yourself.
Thank you, Stuart. Yeah, I'm really excited to have Anja on the show today. My name is Finn. I've been a fractional executive for 10 years. And I think Anja is only the second COO we've had on today. So I'm looking forward to her insights.
So the first thing I'd like to go into, Anja, just so that the listeners can get a better sense of who you are and what you've done. Tell us a bit more about your experience and what you've been doing over the last few years.
Sure. I'll try not to go too far back, but I will say that my career spanned a couple of different industries, focusing on healthcare over the last, 15 years, dare I say. I've worked in healthcare supply chain for a number of years, helping with data and analytics. And then because I enjoy both data and talking to people, it turned into a more client-facing role where I worked with a $4 billion account of theirs, the children's hospitals. From there, I went into the insurance sector and ran the account management department as well as some operational areas for a national insurance company. Made some changes there that helped streamline operations, improve morale, and improve client retention and satisfaction. Those two things often go hand in hand, I find. And while I was there, I became aware through a various number of things in my life that there was a shortage of connection of people with mental health providers here in the US. So even prior to COVID, people were having trouble accessing reliable mental health care. So I started a company sort of off the side of my desk as a project, really, to help connect people with care. And then in the end of 2022, stepped out of my full-time job with insurance to go work full-time with that company, Leaf Mental Health. Scaled it, grew it. Within 18 months, we were not only profitable, we had close to 15,000 providers across all 50 states, all insurance carriers. And that's really stabilized and started to grow. So I'm stepping back into what I really enjoy, which is working with larger companies that have these sort of complex matrixed issues, helping to diagnose and solve those.
With Leaf Mental Health there, how did that look, taking it from zero to was that 15,000 members you said across the US?
It was providers. So
Yeah.
I'm happy to talk about Leaf. It was a passion project for years. So Leaf, again, started with an understanding that there were lots of people who needed help and they couldn't find care. And then on the flip side of that market, realizing there are lots of therapists who are looking for patients and don't know how to find them. So I thought we got to get these two together. So created a sort of a double-sided marketplace for them to find one another. It was unique. I mean, it still is unique in that we never charged providers for referrals. We work primarily with employers. So we're hired as an employee benefit by employers here in the US, both large and small. And when their employees need help finding mental health care for themselves or their dependents, they just contact us. And we reference our list of nearly 15,000 providers to match them up with somebody. I learned a lot. We certainly had a lot of iterations along the way. It didn't end up exactly like I thought it would when we started, but I think it served a really valuable purpose, and it's helping people get what they need in the world, which is, a real core drive of mine is helping people and making sure that they get the care and the support that they need.
we've spoken to a couple of people that they're doing the fractional work, but they also have the founder experience like yourself, which obviously makes it a lot more valuable working with founders because you can, see their side of it. How has that shaped some of your fractional COO work?
I mean, I walk the talk, right? I know what it's like to be the person who's up at 2:00 in the morning when you're just starting something and trying to figure out a problem that came up. Feeling like it's your baby. Like, I totally understand all of those feelings and had to work through them myself, right? Finding other people to work for you and do the work for you and realize there are other people who can do the job you've been doing, and some of them are even better at marketing, at some of the functions you have to do all of at the very beginning. So I was very good at delegating in corporate America and finding and identifying who was very good at what job, even if they weren't doing that today, right? And moving them into those roles to better align the organization. So applying those principles to Leaf helped me hire the right people, streamline it. But I do understand what it's like to have to feel so much attachment to the outcome and so much care for the business that it's just not a job. It's part of who you are. So that's very relatable for me. And the passion and drive that people who are leaders put into the organization, I mean, that's very real. And, I understand what it means to honor that.
Yeah, you touched on something there that I know that you do, or that you specialize in sometimes, which is going into a company and potentially changing the organizational structure of it or
Yeah.
what people do in the company. How do you identify if that is the right first step versus, a number of other things that you could do when you first join a company?
Well, when you first start working somewhere, I mean, I think the real first step is just taking a breath and understanding what the situation is. Everything is the way it is for a reason, right? Going in and making changes immediately before you understand the backstory of why things are the way they are can be dangerous. You can start, uprooting things, and it has an impact you just couldn't have anticipated because you don't understand why it is that way. So understanding what the situation is and why is a really critical first step. And it also respects the work that people have put in up to that point. I mean, people worked very hard to get it there. And understanding that backstory is critical. Once that's done, I find it sort of emerges that you understand it's the people, the systems, the processes, those are the things. And it's going to depend on each organization and what their problems are and how long they've been around, all kinds of things. But those, once you start to really understand how they got there, it often sort of self-identifies to a new set of eyes where there was a left turn or where the old system stopped really helping them. And it's time to make a change. And when it comes to people, the people doing the work have a lot of insights. People actually doing the work have a lot of insights. So taking the time to listen to them and understand their perspective is also really important. I think that can you can find some real diamonds in those
Yeah.
conversations.
What does that initial diagnostic process look like? Because obviously it's easier said than done you know, to figure out what the problem is and then create the solution
Yeah.
on that. How do you figure out what the problem is? Are there certain people you always want to talk to first, or certain questions, or something like that?
Yeah, so that's really fun, actually, figuring out what's happening and solving that puzzle. That's a really fun part of the first step. Always start with talking to the senior leaders who are there to understand their perspective. Like, what are the goals? What are they trying to get to that they haven't been able to get to? Or, how really understand their perspective of where things are not what they want them to be. From there, it is pretty situational. So diving into whatever departments have been identified as having a role in those concerns and really talking to people at every level, like talking to the managers and the directors and, the people who are also up late at night coding and doing their work and figuring out, like, really the people who have their hands in it. generally see things a little bit differently. And again, their perspective is valuable. So generally speaking, it's a top-down approach. But that doesn't mean one person's point of view is more valuable than anybody else's. Each person has a really valuable perspective that needs to be weighted to come up with what a possible solution would be. And often there's not just one way. There are a couple of different ways. So talking through what that means to the organization, the long-term path they want to be on in 5-10 years, and the sustainability, like what's going to be the most sustainable and what can handle the most bumps in the road that inevitably come up.
I know that
Anja, sorry, Stuart, just a really curious Finn chipping in here. What are the kind of core metrics, do you think, that really shape what good looks like when you're looking at organizations? Because obviously there's very different approaches to how an organization can be shaped, which goals that they're shooting for. But to you, what makes the most effective organization from an operational point of view?
What gets measured gets done. It's important to focus on those goals. So if there is something that's stated as being important to them, and it's not being tracked every day, it's not being, visually identified for everybody, that's a gap, I would say. So understanding, again, it is going to depend on what their goals are and where they are in their process. But nailing those KPIs and the outcomes that are important allows you to sort of back into the process around that and determine what's missing along the way. Customer perspective is always very important. There are times to engage the customer to understand where there might be gaps there. But I always want to handle that very gingerly because those relationships are incredibly important and people don't like having somebody new going in and asking questions. So how to get that feedback is pretty nuanced. But yeah, nailing those KPIs, like what are your clients saying about you? How much revenue are you making? How much growth is there within the existing business? Are there opportunities in the market that your competitors are capturing and you're not, and why not? Those are the kinds of things to look at.
Very good. It reminds me of Pearson's law, I think, which is that which is measured improves, and that which is measured and recorded improves exponentially. You heard of that one before?
I have heard of that one before.
Yeah. I think that's it. But yeah, absolutely agree with your focus there. Thank you.
Sure, thanks.
That's a new one for me. I've not heard that one before, but it's good.
Every day's a school day.
It's classic.
What kind of role do things like mission and culture play for you in companies that are maybe stagnant? Because I appreciate that, as you were saying there, with what's measurable and recordable and stuff like that, of course, that plays a huge impact. But, the more subjective, sometimes unquantifiable things can play an impact as well, such as mission and purpose. How does that sort of fit into what you do?
Yeah, no, that is huge. So I like to think of, there's often some restructuring. I like to think of it as a reorg with a soul. One of the things I do well is creating a sense of calm through those periods of transition. There are people doing jobs all over the company, and sometimes you have a handful of people who are doing a lot of the work. How they communicate and how they interact with everybody else really matters. Some people are, very visible in the organization. You want to be attentive to that. But yeah, often there are people who are good at things, and they're doing a job because they can do it well, not necessarily because they love it. So understanding what each person enjoys contributing and what they contribute well, and then moving them into a role that's more aligned with that, will ultimately serve the organization, because you have people who feel engaged, seen, empowered. And those people, when they're doing things that they're excited about and they enjoy, also tend to be much more creative in those roles. And I don't have a lot of data around this, but I do have a lot of experience seeing it. When people feel really seen and trusted, they're willing to present new ideas. They're willing to be creative and take risks. And those are the kinds of risks and ideas that can lead to a 10x jump instead of a 2x jump. The things that people would not feel comfortable bringing up in a room where they didn't feel really solid in their role. So the confidence that comes with doing that is absolutely huge. And a company culture that encourages people to do not just what they're good at, but what they enjoy. It will cultivate that kind of creativity, that kind of growth. And then you have people who are not only doing better in their jobs, but they're staying longer to do more of it. And it gets to be a place people want to work. I mean, really, the impact is tremendous. Then you have your hiring pool gets bigger because it's a place to go where people enjoy being there. Like a lot of good things start to happen when you realize that engaging the people at every level of the company in a way that honors what they're good at and what they enjoy, like you'll become unstoppable.
When you're helping restructure a business and figure out what people should be doing and things like that, do you ever have to make the tough call of deciding that someone's not a fit and they should be let go?
Yes, occasionally. And I'll actually hang out on this subject for a while because this is a very sensitive subject and an important one where I've learned some big lessons in my career. I remember a while ago when I was working in Texas, we had to do a restructure. I was still learning a few lessons about leadership. And I remember we needed to let somebody go. And I was very resistant to the idea. And I was talking to the senior vice president in charge of the area and saying, I just feel like it's going to hurt morale. It's just going to hurt morale if we start letting people go. And and he made a really good point that was painful to hear, but true. He said, if somebody is underperforming, not only are you ultimately on the hook for that work, so this is on you if you want to put your name behind it, keep that in mind. He said, but really other people are picking up the slack for them. So if there's somebody underperforming who can't do the work or won't do the work, I mean, if they need training, that's a little different, but if they can't or won't, other people are picking up the slack and they know it and they resent it. So by removing the people who are underperforming in ways that can't be corrected or they don't want to do it, that actually helps morale. It makes people feel better because you're taking care of them. You're giving them the more support for the work that they do, and you're not asking them to do somebody else's job. So that was a big lesson for me, and it is very true. I've seen it play out exactly that way a few times. And the other thing I'll say about those difficult conversations, and it's often a stressful time when there are changes happening in a company. I think I posted about this about a week ago too. If you have to have a difficult conversation with an employee, just take a minute to yourself first and think of something you like about them. Find a way to actually care about that person. It doesn't have to be that you love everything about them, but you have to care about something about them and really feel into that before you sit down and talk to them. If you feel really anxious, if you don't like them, there is tons of data around this, right? All of the nonverbal cues that people give when they're talking, something like 90% of communication is nonverbal, that if you can't find a way to genuinely care about that person going into that conversation, don't have it. I don't care if you got on a plane to get there. Don't have it. Wait until you can get into a place where you really care about them. It's going to go better for you. It's going to go better for them, and it will go better for the company. If you can just find that space. And if you can't, someone else probably needs to have the talk. So sorry to linger on that, but that is really important, I think.
That's very useful.
It's an interesting tactic. I don't know if you've ever read a book called Good to Great, where they studied... Yeah, it's pretty good. They studied, a team of research studied about 10 or 12 companies that consistently outperformed the general stock market over like 8 or 10 years. And my biggest takeaway from that book was that when they looked at the great companies versus the good companies that they compared, the average employee, turnover was actually about the same in both of the sample groups. But the big difference was in the great companies, typically either people stayed for a really short amount of time or a really long amount of time. Because when they made a bad hire, they, they didn't sort of hope and pretend, well, maybe they'll get better. They just, they got rid of them as soon as they could, basically. And because they had such a quick turnover of bad talent, the good talent that was there didn't have to pick up the slacks, or there wasn't, an issue with morale, and they stayed a lot longer, which I thought was really interesting and kind of aligns with what you were saying there.
That is interesting. You're not doing anybody any favors by keeping them in a job that they don't like and they're not doing well at. Like, you're truly not. I had a goal for years working in larger companies of having 25% turnover consistently in my team. The goal was to have that be through people getting promoted or moving on to other roles. Sometimes it was lateral, sometimes it was step up, but becoming a place, where people knew that they were seen and appreciated. Occasionally that did mean that I think we did a great job with hiring, but every once in a while there'd be a moment where it just wasn't working and you had to acknowledge that. But yeah, I think that, there are lots of ways for things to go, and having people really feel like their work is appreciated and their time is valued is huge. Yeah.
When there are these high turnover issues, how do you identify it's because of bad hires, so sort of individual problems, or because of something negative on the company's side of things?
I mean, if there's a systemic issue they're seeing, like a lot of turnover consistently, there's probably a systemic problem behind it. It's hard to say without looking at each, individual cases. They're all different. But that would be my first thought, that there's something in the process, either their hiring process, onboarding process, something in there that's creating a sense that people just don't want to stay. And often it's your best people who leave first when you have that kind of turnover. And that can spiral quickly into a lot of other problems for an organization. So yeah, you'd want to be right on top of that.
Interesting. One of the sort of achievements you have is you restructured 160 million revenue insurance business in 6 months or so. How did you approach that challenge? What did that look like?
There was a business that it was a low persistency rate for their clients. So they had low retention rate, whatever you want to call it, for their client base. They also worked with employer groups, and they just weren't staying. I would have expected to be 90 plus, and it wasn't. So it's understanding that there is a metric that's underperforming, and then understanding who supports that. So what departments focus on that, and talking to the people who are not just leaders, but the people doing the work. In that particular case, it was some time in group meetings with the people who were the account management team. I was directly working with the clients and understanding what their pain points were, why they weren't happy, what they saw as the problems. And we made changes from there. It takes a little bit longer to engage the people doing the end work and getting their consensus and their buy-in. And it is a lot of facilitation, understanding the different perspectives. I mean, sometimes you ask 4 people, you get 5 answers. You just need to facilitate getting to a common solution that people can agree on. And if the people who are doing the work are bought into that solution, if they helped create that solution, takes a little bit longer to do all that engagement and all of that facilitation. But the implementation of those changes was very smooth. It was their idea, right? So the implementation was really smooth. They felt, again, heard, seen, and the persistency rate popped. And what we did in that particular case is each account manager had something like 2,000 accounts they were managing, which meant it was almost impossible for them to know anybody individually because they were just handling all day long. It was like just back to back, you're churning, which can be a little demoralizing, right? After a while, you don't get to know anybody. You're just executing tasks all day. People who are after relationships are doing a clerical task. So we reorganized it. So the goal was for them to have between 200 and 225 clients each. And then for this really large bulk of smaller accounts, we formed a team of people who serviced them in this more repetitive capacity. So we kept the team small. Anybody who contacted them a lot, they got to, you get to know your people. But the ones who were focused on the 20% of accounts that made up 80% of the revenue, right? The old 80-20 rule. That 80% of the revenue, they felt like they had somebody now. If they had one person they could go to, somebody who knew them. And for those really big accounts, we created a key account team for the really huge clients. And if, I don't know, somebody's kid got into Harvard, you sent them a Harvard sweatshirt or whatever middle school they wanted to go to. Like, you were right on top of that relationship and really knew them. So it was, in that case, focusing on the workload and how it allowed them to have deeper relationships and ultimately provide better service. And that better service not only led to higher retention rates, but also led to more sales, right? You've got those clients who are now referring you and brokers who are sending in other business because it's nice to work with this company. And you can trust them to help you when you need it.
Ultimately, that makes total sense, of course, in hindsight, in terms of the process, the change, the outcomes.
Yeah.
But it must have taken, it took you to come into the business and do that. Why do you think the CEO or the founder didn't create those changes in the first place?
I mean, it was a small company that grew up to be big, right? I think they had tried it a couple of different ways before I got there. Fresh eyes, it's a real thing, right? Having somebody show up new with a different perspective and a kind of a curiosity and no ego stake in the business that's already there, right? You just are really curious about what the possibilities are. And that allows answers to present themselves. So they had grown a great business, really. From the bottom up, they did an amazing job. The people who started it were warm, friendly people who worked hard. Like, it was really nice, hardworking people. And I think they just outgrown some of these processes. And there's not like one day that you've suddenly outgrown it. It happens over time, gradually. And, having somebody step in at that point just sees it differently than the person who watched it grow every day.
Yeah, makes total sense.
Anja, you mentioned before that getting people to do what they really enjoy doing is one of the keys to making people more effective and efficient. What do you think are the best ways of finding out? Obviously, we've got a lot, it's evolved quite a lot in terms of how we understand people work, in terms of understanding things like neurodiversity, different proclivities, different ways of understanding things. Now we've got personality tests and all of these, psychometric testing and those kind of tools. But what do you think really gives the best insight into what's best for the person in aligning them with their function?
So I do like using some of those tests every once in a while. I think for a lot of people, they're fun to take. People like to find out about themselves. I'm a fan of Gallup's work. And there are lots of other ones out there. The DISC evaluations, I feel like in my many years in corporate America, I've probably done a dozen of them. They all seem to come back saying about the same thing, but taking, all of these different tests. So I do believe in getting data around it, but I also believe in talking to people. If you just observe them for a little while and talk with them, it's usually clear what people like. You see when they talk about something, they get excited about it. You can see when they, focus on a project, it gets more of their attention, their tone, their expression changes. Like, those are also data points that are worth noticing. And, if you ask them what they've done and what they enjoyed, a lot of times people will tell you. So I think it's pulling all of that data together, objective and subjective, to understand where they're a good fit. Somebody who's underperforming in one role might be fantastic in a different one. They're just doing work that they can do, but they don't really like doing. So that definitely happens.
What are your thoughts on those, the quieter types, like I say, I mentioned kind of neurodiversity and that kind of thing. It seems that they're often the brilliant ones that sometimes get left behind because they don't know how to advocate for themselves, right? They don't know
Yeah.
how to assert in situations and that kind of thing. What kind of advice and training could you give to them, or advice could you give to the people that lead them?
Yeah, that's very real. Quieter people can be more difficult to diagnose for their skills and their passions, for sure. Objective data, like the Gallup that you read, that like those things are helpful in those situations where you don't have as much subjective data. It does take more time to get to know those people. Talking to the people they work with closely who have known them for longer is helpful. And I think, patience, it does require a degree of patience and empathy and understanding to, to understand what's important to somebody and what they value. So you absolutely can find those things out. I can think of an example, even when I was working with the insurance company. One of the women who I worked with and then worked for me, she's operationally brilliant. If there was a detail from a meeting 8 years ago, she would be the first one to quietly chime in and politely remind everybody, like, oh yeah, do you remember we had this problem 8 years ago with this other system and this is what we did. But she was not one to be particularly loud or outspoken. And it took a little time to sort of see these patterns, but I quickly realized it's important to listen to her when she does talk. She knows what she's saying, and to get her into more rooms, because eventually when she starts to realize that her voice is the one guiding the conversation, it'll give her more confidence to use it, which will make her happier, and goodness knows it was helping everybody else in the room because she knew what she was talking about, and it saved us who knows how many hours of work that could have, that we rabbit holes that seemed like a good idea, but she knew that there was a detail somewhere down here that would thwart it all. And she's right.
It seems to be the quieter ones that retain all the data, isn't it?
It's a superpower.
Yeah.
It really is. It is an undervalued superpower, truly.
One of my sort of ongoing operational challenges sometimes is when I'm caught up with the day to day, the month to month, I might figure out which big changes I want to make. I want to move someone into this role. I want to change, offers or pricing structure or whatever it may be. But if it's quite a big change, I find it so challenging to implement without tons of bumps in the road as it's being implemented, because business goes on. So what I a lot of the time end up doing is I just wait until Christmas, because for me, my kind of business, nothing really happens. We don't do LinkedIn outreach around that Christmas time. We don't really sign new clients. It's a great time for me to just work behind the scenes, make changes, and then get everything moving again in January. For some companies, though, they don't really have that luxury if they don't have such a clear off season. When you're going into a company, you know what you want to change after some diagnostics. How do you do that without creating problems and without creating so many hurdles as business is going on?
Yeah, well, it's nice. So normally the changes that I put into place, I do consistently within 4 to 6 months. So if there's seasonality that fits in that time frame, fabulous. May not be the case. Often, if there are big changes, again, engaging the people who are going to participate in that change. When change happens to you, it feels very different than if you have a role in identifying what that change is going to be. If you participate in identifying it and creating it, it feels so different than if it happens to you out of the blue. So if you know it's going to be a big shift, engaging people early is always a good thing to do. And if you can engage, is actually another Gallup principle I learned many years ago, is if for change management, engaging the people who are popular, frankly. I mean, in most companies, there are employees who are warm, they do a good job, people like them, they are, they're just very well liked by their colleagues, and getting people who are really well liked and do a good job on board with an idea early will do a lot of the work for you. If they feel comfortable and excited about it, there's going to be chatter that you'll never see behind the scenes as people are talking about all these changes. And having those people who are, popular and effective, so being supportive of the idea will go a long way to helping it implement more smoothly. But again, it's taking the time to spend with people and have them feel like they're engaged in the change. It does take a little longer at the front end to get started and get the process identified and, get it documented and ready to go. But you save a boatload of time in implementation, and then it's sustainable because people are bought into it instead of having people who are doing the work trying to stop you along the way. Which particularly in large companies, I've seen happen. There's a senior leader who makes a decree about how things are going to go. And then as it filters its way down through the different departments, the person who's actually doing the work will know what details to manage to stop that change from happening. I mean, you can make it really painful. So engaging people early, and particularly people who are, who are liked by their colleagues, will make a big difference.
You've said that you only work with clients who can see at least a 5x ROI from you.
Yeah.
How do you make that case up front?
Understanding the problem. So that's what that first conversation is really about. I don't think it's worth it for them or for me to spend time working together. I mean, 4 to 6 months of your life is a long time. So I want to make sure they're getting a lot out of it. And I feel very confident that they're getting at least that much out of it to feel like I'm delivering the sort of value that I expect from myself. And that's what makes it satisfying for me. Yeah, I think that is incredibly important. And if it's not obvious that that's something that can happen for them, then maybe the problem's just not a big enough problem. I mean, I can probably give them some quick tips that would be helpful to get them going on it. But again, I'm a helping person. I want to support people, but I feel like at this stage, I want to have the most impact possible in working with companies that are out there doing things in the world that I think are great. I want them to do more of it. I want to solve their problems. I want them to go 5x, 10x and grow and do more of those great things in the world. So that's where I want to spend my time. And those first conversations are really about understanding the scope of the company and the scope of the problem, to determine if the value potential is there. And we'll talk through that.
One of the interesting things about your experience for me is your time across different industries. So fashion, healthcare, and finance, to name some. What bottlenecks and operational problems do you see as trends across every industry you're in?
That's a great question. I would say, and I hope this isn't too unpopular, there is a tendency to undervalue people in certain roles. Like customer service is often an undervalued role. That's a person talking to your customers. Like you want to make sure that they're happy, they're attentive, they're well trained. Like that's important. But people tends to be a lower paid position and high turnover in a lot of companies. Not all. Some outsource it completely. Some have sent it out to AI. But you really want to have your A game, and that can be AI, I suppose, but you really want to have your A game with anything that's client facing. And then in fashion, interestingly, this is something that I noticed across different companies in the fashion industry. Things that aren't client facing, like I can think of one example. Maybe this will help. Working for a designer in DC, this store that was big, beautiful, show store, like they should have been one of their top performers, was near the bottom. They couldn't figure out why. It's because their stockroom was a mess, right? So they had salespeople who fit the brand, had the image. They were great salespeople. They did a great job. But if somebody wanted to buy a $2,000 dress, maybe it was hidden somewhere in the wrong place in the back of that room. Maybe it just wasn't well organized behind the scenes. So there was an operational gap there, right? And generally speaking, stock people are a little lower paid. It's a behind the scenes kind of job. But in an organization like that, you don't want the people who can make you a lot of money spending all of their time dinging around in the back room. So we hired a stock person, paid him a little bit more than anybody else was in the area. And when he was there, when he wasn't processing and opening boxes and getting things like perfect and organized back there, he was bringing stuff up. So as we sold things, he would bring stuff up from the back. So the salespeople didn't have to do it. I mean, we had some huge multi-million-dollar days in that store because salespeople were out there talking to customers. They were engaging. Everything they needed was right in front of them. They weren't wasting time running back and forth. And there was somebody who was available to bring stuff up and help them. So I think understanding that there's value in those operations, that those roles that are often undervalued, like in this case, the stock person, can perform tasks that are a game changer for the company. And just seeing that gap and making these little changes can make a world of difference.
Since you're in the fractional game now, which obviously lends itself to smaller companies, what do you think is the right stage or the right time that a company should potentially bring you into what they're doing?
Yeah, I would say people, generally speaking, companies that are at least 5 million in revenue. And that, I mean, revenue numbers can be a little tricky, right? I think they have to be established enough that they have systems they're prepared to change at the very early stages. And I know this from my own experience, at the very early stages, it's just everybody roll up their sleeves and you do what you got to do when you got to do it. And it's very fluid and you're figuring out your process. And while I'm happy to help in advisory capacity for some of those organizations about, helping them understand what could happen with the process that they're putting in place, what that could do in 3 and 5 and 10 years, where I think there's real value, or more established companies probably who have been fundraising through maybe seed A, maybe even a B round, that see that they're slowing. So they had this great traction, they've grown, and now it's sort of stalling in one area or another. That if you're seeing a goal that you're not hitting and you really feel like you should, like your gut is telling you this should be happening and you don't know why, call me. I'll help you figure it out and we'll get to the bottom of it and get it turned around. 4 to 6 months the most is what it always takes.
Awesome. Yeah. Any closing comments or questions from you, Finn?
No, it's been massively insightful, and I could honestly speak to Anja like for hours on end. So I think we need to invite her back at some point to dive a little bit deeper. Just one thing I'm kind of curious about. You mentioned about fashion, and then you've obviously worked in corporate America as well. Yeah. What kind of forced the change from one to the other?
So honestly, that was lifestyle back then. I mean, that was a while ago. Mm-hmm. This is something I've always enjoyed. Making these sorts of changes are things I've always enjoyed and felt like I was good at. But the particular designer I was working for, I won't mention who it was, but I was basically sleeping there, right? At one point it was very stressful, and it was about 45 minutes to an hour away from home. So going back and forth was a little tricky, and I didn't have to. Honestly, it's because I was at a stage in my career and in my life where that was something I was interested in doing and being there all the time, but it really burned me out. Mm-hmm. So I learned from that experience that doesn't have to be that way. You can, all the changes that I made that helped them, none of them required that level of exhaustion or exertion. It was a choice. But I have an appreciation for how hard people work in that industry at the store level and in different brands. I worked for a couple of different brands. It's a hard job, and people deserve a lot of respect who do it. They don't always get it. But from there, I went into finance, and I love data. I do. Yeah. I get out my pocket protector and start looking at all the numbers, and sometimes it'll magically emerge about, what could be better, just looking at those.
Yeah. And just as a last question, I'm just curious to find out, What do you love about operating on a fractional basis? Obviously, you're working with multiple companies at the same time.
Yeah.
What do you like about this style of work as opposed to just working with one company?
So I think it's really fun to go to diagnose these problems and understand where those changes can happen. Where I've been the most in my zone of genius, as they say, like the most alive, the most excited, is when I'm doing that across multiple projects. So if I've often when I work somewhere, I'll get pulled into other areas to help with, whatever issues are happening there. I really like jumping across these different silos, these different parts of a company, these matrix organizations, to understand where where the changes can happen. So that sort of jumping around is actually very satisfying for me. I enjoy it. It keeps it exciting. It keeps it engaging. And a lot of times you can learn things from one company that helps another. So the more I learn from each company I've worked with, I can bring that new understanding to the next place. You can bring all of the things you learn, help everybody you work with in the future. So working with multiple companies is really exciting because you're learning a lot of different things at once. And you can then deliver that to everybody you're engaged with in present and future. It's great.
Yeah. I can tell you bring a lot of passion and energy to what you do. So thanks for doing what you do. Just lastly, what's the best way for somebody who might be listening to contact you?
Sure. It's adunphy@ascendconsulting.us is my email address. Would love to hear from anybody who is curious to talk more about this.
Excellent. And you have a website as well?
I do. It is, as you might guess from looking at my email address, it's ascendconsulting.us.
Fantastic. Okay. Well, thank you so much for your time and giving it to us today. It's been a great conversation before the show and while we've been doing it as well. And like I say, I think we need to get Anja back on again, Stuart, if that's possible.
Definitely. Yeah. Well, thanks again for joining us, and for the viewers and listeners, thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you in the next episode.
Thanks, guys. See ya.